Assalamu alaikum ji. In this video, I will be talking about two things. One is the absolute cell referencing, and one is the relative cell referencing. So let me open up Excel so that we can have a better idea about both of these. All right. So I'm going to take a sample data. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And in this cell, I'm just going to apply a simple function, which is sum. Bracket open, I'm going to define this range. When I press enter, it will add up all the values as the sum function actually performs. But now the question comes in when the examiner asks you to replicate the function for each of the entries in your Excel workbook or your data. So for instance, if we have applied the function in one cell, we can replicate it downwards, we can replicate it upwards, and we can also replicate it on the sides. But as you can see that the function which was initially sum of this range, when I replicated it in both the directions, upwards and downwards, and right side of it, it actually did not have the right or the correct answer. Because the criteria right now is to add up all these values. And even if I replicate this function vertically upwards or downwards, or towards the right hand side or the left hand side, the function should display the same answer. Let me shift the data towards the left hand side so that I can also make a reference or replication towards the left hand side. So this was the function, and now if I replicate it on the left hand side, it gives me a different error, or maybe it's not basically adding it up. If I replicate it upwards, if I replicate it downwards and onto the right hand side, it gives me a different answer. Now, the concept of absolute cell referencing refers to that whatever your cell reference is in your applied function or the cells or the range should remain constant. Even if you replicate it vertically upwards, downwards, right hand side, or left hand side, the range should remain static. And to do so, what we do is we will apply the function, we will define our range, and what we can do is we can press F4. And once you press F4 once, you will get to see a dollar sign before and after your column name. So column name is basically B over here, which is actually our reference column onto the left hand side, as you can see. So there's a dollar sign before and after your column name. And so is for the last cell of my range, which is B23. I get to see a dollar sign before and after my column name. So when we do this and we replicate it vertically upwards, or we replicate it vertically downwards, or we replicate it onto the right hand side or towards the left hand side, it will still give us the same answer because the cell references are basically made absolute or static. So no matter where you replicate your function, your range will remain static. So if I look at this cell, I'll double click on it, you get to see that the range is still the same. And even on to the right hand side, if I double click on it, you get to see that the range is still the same. So this concept is actually called the absolute cell referencing. All right. Now let's make some changes to the function which we have applied in this particular cell. So I'll just select this range and I'll press F4 again. Now what you see is that the dollar sign is only appearing after the column name and not before it. And so is for my last cell in my range, the dollar sign is appearing after my column name and not before it. Now if I replicate it upwards, the answer remains same. And if I replicate it downwards, the answer remains same. But if I replicate it towards the right hand side, or if I replicate it towards the left hand side, the answer changes. So that concludes that when we have a dollar sign after the column name, and it is appearing only after the column name, then that means that the range is made absolute for vertical replication only and not for the horizontal replication. Okay, I hope this is clear. Now let me change the function a bit more. I'll select the range and I'll press F4 again. Now what you see is that the dollar sign is appearing before the column name and not after it. And so does it applies to my last cell of my range, that is B23. The dollar sign is appearing before the column name and not after it. Now when I apply it and try to replicate it towards the right hand side, the answer remains same. And if I replicate it towards the left hand side, the answer remains same. But if I replicate it upwards or if I replicate it downwards, the answer changes, right? So that means that when the dollar sign is appearing before the column name only, that means that the replication is basically made absolute for horizontal replication. So the cell references onto the right hand side or to the left hand side will remain the same. The range will remain the same. But if I click on this particular cell, when I double click on it, as you can see that this cell has moved up. The range that I specified has also moved up. Now, moving along the function is actually what we call the relative cell referencing. So, relatively, it has moved the number of cells that I replicate. For example, if I replicate it downwards, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that means my range has moved 7 cells downwards as well. So when I double click on it, as you can see that the range started from this cell, but it actually ended up over here. So that is what we call relative referencing. But when we have the range appearing without any dollar sign, that means that it is relative referencing for all sorts of replication, whether it's vertically upwards or vertically downwards or horizontally rightwards or to the left hand side. That means that the range is actually moving along with the replication. So if I click on this cell, this has moved 2 cells towards the right hand side. So when I double click on it, the range has also moved 2 cells onto the right hand side. So this is what we call relative referencing, and I hope the absolute cell referencing is also clear. So basically when we have the range, when we press F4 once, you can see dollar sign appearing before and after the column name, which makes it absolute for all sorts of replications in any direction. And if I press F4 again, in which the dollar sign is appearing after the column name, that means that the replication is made static, or the references are made static for vertical replication. I press F4 again, the dollar sign is appearing before the column name, and that means that the cell references are made absolute for the horizontal replication and not for the vertical replication. When I press F4 again, I'm back to the original position when I specified the range originally. So there are 4 types or 4 modes in which the replication is to be applied, right? So you need to be careful when you specify your range. You need to see that how do you want your range or your references to be made static, whether you want it to be static for the vertical replication, whether upwards or downwards, or whether you want it to be static for the horizontal replication. Normally, what we do the most is basically to have the dollar sign before and after the column name, which means that it will make the cell references static for horizontal replication and for the vertical replication. I hope that you were able to understand both sides or both the replication or the cell references, which is absolute cell references and relative cell references. So if you have any questions, do let me know. And for now, uh, goodbye from my side. Thank you.